Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at how we can initialize our cluster. So before we can initialize our cluster, we basically get and then later sign a certificate signing request or CSR. And this has already been generated by our cluster's first hardware security module. It's our CSR. We can see it in our Linux instance. I'll show you in a little second. So in order to sign our CSR, basically we have to typically use a private certification authority or certificate authority or CA. So these would be people like Thwart or VeriSign or even Amazon's a CA now. And basically your CA is going to sign your CSR and that will create a signed certificate. We then provide the signed certificates and our CA's issuing certificate to initialize the cluster. Now, of course, we don't have a certificate authority right now. We are just doing this as a lab. So we're going to use OpenSSL and we're going to do some commands to create a self-signed certificate, and then we're going to use it as our issuing certificate in order to initialize our cluster. So if all that sounded very complicated, let's just go through it one more time. So we're going to use OpenSSL to generate a private key. We're then going to use that private key to generate our self-signed certificate. We're going to take that self-signed certificate and we're going to basically use it to sign our cluster CSR. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use OpenSSL to create a customer HSM certificate. And this is one that's been signed by our self-signing certificate. Once we've got that, we've got our customer hardware security module certificate, and we're going to use that with our self-signed certificate to initialize our cluster. So hopefully that makes more sense. Again, I'll run through this at the end of the lab, but we just need to log into our Linux instance. Okay, so I'm signed into my EC2 instance. I'm just going to run an ls command. So the certificate I was talking about is this. It's our cluster CSR certificate. Our virtual hardware security module device created this CSR, and basically to initialize our cluster, we need to sign this CSR. So how do we do that? Well, we need to go over to Text Wrangler, go and download the resources section, the text file in the resources section of the course. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and generate a private key. So I'm just going to paste this in here, and the private key is going to be called customer certificate authority.key. So go ahead and hit enter. That then generates my private key, and it's asking me to enter a passphrase. I'm not going to have a passphrase for this. I'm just going to keep it really, really simple. Well, it's making me have a passphrase, so I'm going to enter in my own passphrase. Make sure you remember your passphrase, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It then asks me to verify it, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And if we go ahead and type in ls, we can see our key down here, customer ca.key. Next thing we want to do, go back over to our text editor. We're going to use our private key to generate our certificate, self-signed certificate. This is actually lots of fun. I'm going to clear the screen so you can be able to see it a lot better. So we're going to basically go and create our self-signed certificate. It's going to last for 365 days. And we're going to call it customerca.cert. So hit enter. It's then going to ask you for a passphrase for your key. That was what you just set then. So enter the passphrase. And once you've gone through that, it's going to ask you for your country name. So 2-letter code. So I'm in the UK. I'm going to hit UK. State or province. I'm actually based out of Surrey. So I'm going to hit Surrey. Big shout out to all the Surrey people watching this course. Locality name, e.g. city. I'm just going to type in London. And then organization name, so A Cloud Guru, you can do whatever it is you want. Organizational unit name, so it could be a section. So I'm part of the A Cloud Guru instructor team, so I'm going to write instructor. In here, the common name or the name of your server's host name, I'm just going to write Ryan. Email address, I'm not going to give you guys my email address, no offense. I get weird emails as it is. I'm going to just make up a random email address, and there we go. If I type in ls, you'll be able to see my certificate. So I've got my customer CA certificate. I've just created that. Next thing we want to do is just copy and paste this into our clipboard. So we've got a copy of it. Go back over to your Text Wrangler. It's probably going to be easier just to paste it in manually than doing a find and replace, but paste that in there and paste that in there. And so what we're doing here is we're going to sign our cluster's CSR. So you can see our cluster's CSR in here using our customer certificate, which we just generated, as well as using our key. and we're going to then output this to our customer HSM certificate. So we're going to create a signed certificate, and we'll use this to initialize our cluster. I know this can seem really complicated, but if you go back over and you look at the videos and the animations, it gets a lot easier. And like I said, there's no easier way to learn this than getting your hands dirty. So I'm back in my terminal window. Again, I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to go ahead and paste this in and hit enter. It's now asking me for my passphrase for my private key, so enter that in here. And there we go. If we type in ls, we'll be able to see our new key, which is this one here, the customer HSM certificate.crt. So we're going to need to use this as well as our self-signed certificate in order to initialize our cluster. So we're done. I know it looked complicated. What we now need to do is go back over to Cloud HSM. So I'm back in Cloud HSM where I was initializing my cluster. It feels like forever since I've been on this screen. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And it says here, use downloaded CSR and your issuing certificate to generate the cluster certificate. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And now all I need to do is upload it here. So how can I do that when it's in my EC2 instance? Well, that's where S3 and our AWS command line comes and saves the day. So I'm back in my terminal window. So the two files that we're going to need, and I know this can be all look a bit confusing, but we're going to need our customer HSM certificate.crt, and we're also going to need our customer CA.crt as well. So we need these two certificates. So let's go ahead and just basically sync this this EC2 instance with our S3 bucket. So if you can't remember your S3 bucket, just type in AWS S3 LS. And then what we're going to do, if you want to know your present working directory, just type pwd. And then we're going to type in AWS S3 and then sync. And then we're going to sync our present working directory, which is home EC2-user. And then we're going to sync that over to S3, and then the name of the bucket was a Cloud Guru certificate bucket, and go ahead and hit enter. That's then going to upload all the stuff that we've just generated on this EC2 instance up to S3, where it's got very durable storage. You can actually go ahead and pretty much just nuke this directory or nuke all the files in here to be safe. And let's go back over to S3. Okay, so I'm back in S3. I'm just going to do a refresh, and I should be able to see all my information in here. So there we go. Got all of my certificates. Like I said, the two that we need is our customer CRT. So go ahead and hit download. And then the other one that we needed was our customer HSM certificate.crt. So go ahead and download that as well. Once you've downloaded those two files, go back over to Cloud HSM. So my cluster certificate is the one that I just generated called Customer HSM Certificate. I'm going to go ahead and hit open. And then my issuing certificate is my certificate authority. So it's my customer CA.crt. Go ahead and hit upload that, and then click on upload and initialize. And with any luck, there we go. Initialization is now in progress. Once it is complete, you will need to set the cluster's password before you continue to use the cluster. So I'm just going to pause the video here and wait for this cluster to initialize. Okay, so that is now initialized. So it says once initialization is complete, you'll need to set the cluster password before you can initialize. Okay, so how do I do that? What can I do here? I can't do anything. And that's because we don't manage the Cloud HSM through the AWS console. We actually manage it using an EC2 instance. So in order to do that, we need to go and provision an EC2 instance and then go through and install a bunch of software on there and then use a whole bunch of different utility tools. And we're going to do that in the next lecture. Before we go on and do that, I just want to recap on what we've learned. So I know that seems kind of complicated, but we'll just take it back to what we did. We used OpenSSL to generate a private key. We then used that private key to generate a self-signed certificate, and then we took that self-signed certificate and our cluster's CSR certificate, and we basically used OpenSSL to sign and generate, rather, our customer's HSM certificate. And we actually used the key as well in that process. So it was the private key, the self-signed certificate, and the cluster's CSR that generates our customer's HSM certificate. We then take our HSM certificate and our self-signed certificate, and we uploaded those into Cloud HSM, and we've initialized our cluster. Now, we can't do anything else with our cluster. We have to go in and manage it. In order to do that, we need to provision an EC2 instance in order to manage it. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.